As you know, one of our recurring events we have here offered through the parish community is Theology on Tap. And so we have it at our local pub here in Tottenham, and basically it's set up as a dialogue. So there's myself and there's the youth minister, Ashley Mills. We have a couple of microphones set up and we just talk. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but we actually don't prepare for the thing. So we think of the topic like 5 minutes before and we just go for it. And usually you would think that wouldn't work, but it works for us because we're just being ourselves. We're just talking about things that are already on our minds, things that are already on our hearts. And so I found recently with Theology on Tap, just because we're talking about things which are already on our hearts, we're talking a lot about journeying with other people. Not even so much like talking to difficult people, but journeying with people with regards to difficult things in their lives. And that's what we've been talking about for several months now in different ways. And so given all that, given the preponderance of material, I thought it might be helpful just to kind of draw upon some of the things that we talked about in the context of Theology on Tap and kind of reframe it in terms of a weekend context to kind of make sure that wider parish community kind of benefits. So the first thing that kind of comes to mind, it's really important when you're journeying with other people to ponder deeply things of ultimate concern. It's really important when you're journeying with other people to ponder deeply things of ultimate concern. So not just things like, where am I from, where am I going, how am I supposed to get there, but things like happiness and joy and sadness and suffering and death. Things that people struggle with on an ongoing basis. Like, what do I think of these things? Do I make the time and space to ponder these things deeply? So the example that comes to mind, I remember years ago, before I became a priest, before I entered the seminary, I was talking to a priest friend of mine. He was my spiritual director. So here's someone I would see on an ongoing basis once a month. And we were talking about a whole bunch of different things. And just in passing, he was talking about the subject of joy. And so what he said was that, joy is an act of the will. Joy is an act of the will. Now, when you hear that, you might think, well, that sounds kind of cold and overly abstract. But what he was getting at was that every single day, no matter who we are, we're constantly being impinged upon by all sorts of different thoughts. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. A lot of them are negative. In fact, most of them are negative. And the average number of thoughts that people deal with, like 60,000 thoughts. Just think about that. And the idea is that you have no choice in the matter. So no matter who you are, no matter your particular circumstance, there's 60,000 thoughts which impinge upon your heart and your mind and your soul, most of which are negative. They're pulling it away of darkness and sadness and despondency and despair. So you have no choice with regards to that particular dynamic. But at the same time, you do have a choice always to entertain certain thoughts as opposed to other thoughts. So again, you imagine a situation, 60,000 thoughts impinging upon my mind, my heart, my soul, but I still have the choice to entertain this thought as opposed to these thoughts. And so the invitation is to be slightly more intentional, to choose to open one's heart to those thoughts which lead to life, joy, self-possession, which lead to God, as opposed to other thoughts which lead to sadness and despondency and despair. So that's what my spiritual director meant when he said joy is an act of the will. Now that said, when he said it so many years ago, that particular quote, I hadn't really unpacked it to the extent that I just did right now. And so I just remember it as a quote. Here's this quote about the subject of joy. I never unpacked it for years. And fast forward, one day I was a priest myself. I think it was my first year of being a priest. Someone came in to talk to me, and lo and behold, they brought the subject of joy. Father, I've been struggling with a lack of joy in my life for a long time. I'm trying my best to live a good life. I'm trying my best to go God's way, but I think, if I'm honest with myself, I don't feel joy. And in fact, I haven't felt joy for a really long period of time. What saith you? And I said, joy is an act of the will. And that's it. He was polite, but basically the vibe was like, okay, I opened up my heart to you. I revealed this tender place in my heart. And now I feel worse. I feel even more sad, thanks to that terrible advice. Thank you very much. You like to think there's more to the story, but there's not. He left worse after talking to me. And I always remembered that. Now, obviously, it's a painful memory for me. It's a shameful memory for me, But it speaks to this thing. That's what happens when you don't think deeply about things of ultimate concern. All you have left are stupid quotes and empty platitudes. And that's just not good enough. That's not good enough to help people on the journey. That's not good enough for you. It's not good enough for them. Second thing that comes to mind, it's really important to focus on other people as opposed to yourself. I always think of this in terms of like vision, right? So your field of vision is always wide, so you can see a bunch of people at the same time, for example, in the context of the church, but at the same time, your focal point is narrow. So if I'm focused here, by extension, I'm not focused here, there, or other places, right? Field of vision versus focal point. Same thing when it comes to the spiritual life. So if I'm focused on other people, by extension, I'm not focused on myself. If I'm focused on myself, by extension, I'm not focused on other people. And that makes all the difference in the world. Again, back in the day when I first became a priest, I was always preaching about the same thing. There's that expression, every priest only has one homily. There's something to that. Every priest, they like certain themes as opposed to other themes, and okay, that's kind of true, and you dress it up and you hope the people of God don't notice, right? But I think my problem back in the day ran deeper than that. I really was preaching only one homily, and it was about me. It was about this one thing I was wrestling with in terms of my own kind of journey with the Lord and formation. So it wasn't about God, it wasn't meant to help other people. It was just me doing therapy with the people of God. And just even when you hear it out loud, gross. Right? And I remember talking to my interested pastor about this, and I was like, I feel like I'm doing this. And he didn't say, no, you're not, because he knew I was doing that. And so what he said in terms of advice, he was nice about it, but it was harsh. He said, Eric, your problem is you don't care about the people of God. That's actually your problem. You're focused way too much on yourself. So much so that you have no room for the people of God. So this idea of helping people in their respective journeys, it doesn't occur to you because you're so caught up in your own woundedness and pain. 1 John chapter 4, right? Perfect love casts out fear. There's something to be said about working on your own issues. Human formation, spiritual formation, to make sure that the sharp edges of your personality don't constitute an obstacle for people receiving the gospel. So there is something to that. That said, if you're focused too much on yourself, that's when you become anxious, that's when you become worried, that's when you become scared. Because you're made for love, you're not made for introspection. To kind of further illustrate the point, I remember talking to my interested pastor, and he said, you know what? Imagine you come home one day, and you find me unconscious on the kitchen floor. I'm unconscious, and you're not sure if I'm breathing, and there's like blood coming from my head. I bet, even though you're scared and you got issues and stuff, you would forget about all that stuff and focus on me to make sure I was okay. And the reason why you would do that is because I'm your friend and you love me. And something we tend to forget. Oh, I'm not this. I'm not this, I could be that. I got these issues, I got these wounds. Noted, right? But you still have the capacity for love. You make that little switch, I'm going to focus on the other person as opposed to myself. All of a sudden you become brave, you become courageous, you're filled with all sorts of inspiration and creativity because that's the sort of thing for which you were made. To love other people as opposed to simply being caught up in yourself. Final thing that comes to mind, it's really important to cultivate a deep sense of generosity, especially when it comes to your own relationship with Christ. That makes all the difference in the world. The example that comes to mind, I was on YouTube and I saw this, I guess it was an award ceremony, and basically a bunch of people were honoring this really famous actor, Denzel Washington. And basically as part of the award ceremony, there was a presentation by Chadwick Boseman, fellow actor, the guy who played Black Panther in the movie of the same name in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So anyways, he was given this really sweeping poetic speech, and at a certain point he had this really great quote. I'm pretty sure he made it up himself. And basically what he said was that a gift from a sage or a king is worth more than silver and gold. It's a seed of hope and a bud of faith. And then he went on to say, there is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington. Everyone just broke out in applause. I want to make sure you get the point of that particular line or that particular quote, right? Because basically what he was saying was like, imagine there's someone in the world who is great, and wonderful and glorious, someone like a king or a sage. And that person doesn't just look at you, doesn't just make time for you, but believes in you. Believes in you and sees something in you that perhaps you do not see in yourself. And that person backs up that gift by making a gift to themselves to you. It's not just some money or cash. This is something significant and weighty and substantial. It represents a gift of themselves to you. Again, to back up this deep sense of conviction. What does that do to a person? It's meant to awaken something in that person's heart. Maybe I can do more. Maybe I can be more. I dare to believe in the idea of possibility because here's someone amazing who sees something in me that perhaps I do not see in myself. And if I receive that gift and I let it penetrate my heart, it's meant to change my life, as a result of which I pay it forward. So now when I encounter other people, the conviction is like, look, I want you to believe in yourself. I want you to have hope. I want you to be heavily steeped in the notion of possibility. And I do this because I wish to express in my actions gratitude for the one who has loved me first.